Hello and welcome to the One-on-One podcast. If you're enjoying the show, consider signing up for the Patreon. There you get ad-free content, early access, exclusive episodes, and monthly supporter hangouts. You can find it at patreon.com/the One-on-One podcast. If you don't like the subscription-based models, there are other ways of supporting the show that are linked in the description. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy this episode.
They said it was forbidden. They said it was dangerous. They were right. Introducing the paranoid American homunculus owner's manual. Dive into the arcane, into the hidden corners of the occult. This isn't just a comic. It's a hidden tome of supernatural power. All original artwork illustrating the groundbreaking research of Juan Ayala, one of the only living homunculologists of our time. Learn how to summon your own homunculus, an enigma wrapped in the fabric of reality itself, their power at your fingertips, their existence, your secret. Explore the mysteries of the Aristotelian, the spiritual, the Paracelsian, the Crowleyan homunculus. Ancient knowledge lost to time, now unearthed in this forbidden tale. This comic book holds truths not meant for the light of day. Knowledge that was buried, feared, and shunned. Are you ready to uncover the hidden? The Paranoid American Homunculus Owner's Manual, not for the faint of heart. Available now from Paranoid American. Get your copy at tjojp.com or paranoidamerican.com today.
Welcome to the One-on-One podcast with your host, Juan Ayala.
Like, what are they putting in their symbology as this is in this flux state where it's able to take in those kind of symbologies, and then once it crystallizes, hold on to it? Like, that was the last thing that thing's seen. That's sitting there, right there. For myself, for me, the next step of Emoto's work would be where I can take and find, because this is part of why I want an electron microscope, I need to find a very simple salt that's more susceptible to being overwritten than most. So a very simple structured salt. And I want to be able to, while it's in water, say, I write a note, hey, Juan, quit chicken off into chicken eggs, and slap it onto there. And then I send it, and then I dry it out. So it's now just salt crystals. I send it to you. You put it in distilled water and those crystals, and take a drop of it and flash freeze it, and that message shows up.
Welcome back to another episode of the One-on-One podcast. I'm your host, as always. Make sure to follow the show on social media at the One-on-One podcast, tjojp.com, patreon.com/the One-on-One podcast, all that good stuff. Call into the show, 407-476-4606, 407-476-4606. Been getting a lot of interesting messages. Call in, let us know what you thought of this episode, what you think of the show, if you think I'm fake and gay, if you love me, whatever. Call in and leave a message. I want to hear from you. And today we are joined in reality, as real as it's gonna get, because this next guy left me hanging one time because he thought that we had done an entire episode either in the metaverse or the astral realm or in the mob zone, or I don't know where the hell we were, but he said that he did an episode with me and it was really good. But here we are for real this time. Ben, welcome to the show for the first time. Hello, sir.
Hey, Juan. That one is one of the craziest stories. That I don't have dreams. It's a weird thing, and I've I also don't actually picture things in my head. I have conversations. I have long conversations in my head, but I don't have pictures attached with it. And that week, Michelle from Michelle's Healing Home, here's a shout out for her mugwort products. And she had sent us some mugwort products, and I had been using them heavily. And as I get up really early in the morning because the animals are screaming that they need fed at, the ass crack of dawn. And, usually a lot of times we're podcasting till like 11 or 12. So I take a nap in the middle of the day. And for one of the first times ever, I had the most vivid dream of doing interview. And actually Thomas was co-hosting in that interview. And we had a just fantastic time. And I'm like, totally, I'm going to ask him like tomorrow to come on Odin's Alchemy. And then you kept never putting it out. And I'm like, dude, what's the deal with that? Like, and I think I finally asked you, like, dude, you didn't show up. Like,
yeah.
I'm like,
you're like, where's the episode, bro? I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? There was never an episode. So, and I've been talking to SB a lot, and he asked me a question that I was going to ask you, being like part of like that whole, was it heathenism, or I don't know what it's called? Is there a version, or can you guys even go to the mob zone, or do you guys have your own version of that, like this alternate reality where you're able to enter like this, universe B type of thing? Do you guys have a version of that?
We have different realms, but not as much as like, I think, in modern ideologies at all. They definitely had visions, but honestly, that was something more, if you look, in most of our things, dreams, visions, that kind of thing, that was almost exclusively for women. Like your vulvas, that was almost exclusively feminine. Very, very few times. And then usually that's part of why a lot of times there was hallucinogenics attached to these ceremonies where the men were starting to have visions. A lot of times they needed that hallucinogenic type thing to try and bring that about, where women just kind of naturally more had that. I think we're, despite what most people believe today, where most people believe we're at the height of a masculine society, I believe we're at the height of a feminine society, 100%. And I think that's part of why that's such a commonplace thing today, where this having visions and dreams and being daydreamy and things like that, where in a masculine society, people worked. Men didn't sit around and dream about things and do Minecraft. They went out and built, that's so I'm just saying.
But so
there's a whole bunch of proofs for that. But
to piggyback off of that, what would you say about, okay, we have the Freemasons and even Masonry, which could be seen as something masculine, and Freemasons took that and kind of sort of made that their forte. Is that kind of sort of hinting at like the hard work, hard labor type of thing but then they turn it into a mystical sort of initiatory secret society, secret knowledge type of thing as well? Is that kind of like sort of the same mindset of what you're saying? Because I've never really thought about what you're saying, how you're saying it.
Yeah, you stop and think about it. This is the best of both worlds, and it's where that disconnect happens that we really things start going sideways. Okay, so with masonry, you stop and think about a basic brick mason. These are some brawny dudes. They're moving very square bricks, and they're putting them in very straight rows, and everything's level, plumb, the whole nine, right? And that's what their entire world is built off of. But then also, this is the whole philosopher warrior thing, where we didn't used to have, where there wasn't this break between the people that went and studied and read and tried to have higher minded philosophy and things like that, but also then went and put their hands in the dirt. They weren't blackbeards living in their grandma's basement that, have never done anything in the world, but they know all the answers. Well, of course you're right, because you've never tried what you just said. Like, maybe that stuff's been tried and it failed utterly. So the people that were actually doing something went, eh. So with the Freemasonry, you had both. You had these people that were, studying high philosophy, trying, some of them occult, things like that. But at the same time, these were the rooted builders of society that truly were doing the work and planning things out. It's really very, very good. I'm not one of the people that, don't get me wrong, there's been obviously some very evil Masons, but I'm not one of those people that freaks out about Freemasons. I've lived in the United States my whole life, and I've lived in small towns, and all these small towns, everybody knew the people that were the Masons. That was your uncle. That was my grandpa was a Mason. It was all the people that you knew that were the normal businessmen in town, and no, they weren't like sacrificing little kids or anything like that. It was a small town. Like, you all knew each other. These guys were usually the first guys that showed up if there was a problem. They were also the volunteer firemen. They were also all kinds of things, like the functioning things that helped build that town up. That was those guys. And then that allowed everybody else to just do their damn job and live out their life peacefully and have a nice time. In all honesty, as America's went completely down, the Masons are also gone. Like, I've seen numbers where they have under a 30th of what they had even 20 years ago. So they're gone, and things are bad.
Yeah. So hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. And that's kind of sort of what we're experiencing now. Absolutely, I agree with that. And I never thought about how the psychic and higher sensitivity to these other realms is a byproduct of a more feminine time, how you were saying, right? And it's interesting because, right, we can jump off the deep end here. You have Parsons, who believed that there needed to be a counteractive force, a feminine force to what was going on. And he believed that by doing the Babylon working ritual, he was quite literally saving the universe from destruction. And some people say that he did succeed bringing in this feminine act, because you have the 60s and everything right after that, like peace and love, brother, and all this hippiness and stuff like that. And I guess maybe we grew out of it, but it kind of seems like we've been going downhill ever since then. Like, it's a slow decline. And I think other countries see this, and there's a lot of, right, like that wokeness, and I don't really like to get political, but a lot of these ideologies of like, hey, I need my 69th place trophy, right? Everyone needs a pat on the back. It's like, no, dude, you got to work for what's good, because what's the point of everyone getting rewarded equally? Like, what's the point of putting in work? And I think that demotivates like certain people in society. But I'm not saying we should stop trying to strive to be the best. That's what I've always, my father always taught me, that if you're going to do something, even if it's the dumbest job that you've ever had in your life, if you're cleaning toilets at McDonald's, right? You need to be the best toilet cleaner at McDonald's. You need to be the best in your job, because no one's going to remember second place. And that's real cliche, but it's true. So when I started a podcast, I'm like, I want to be good at what I do. I want to be interesting. I want people to seek, right, the knowledge that I'm putting out. And hence we're here, about to be 4 years later since I started, almost 5 years, whatever it is. I started in 2019. So I guess however long that's been. And I've always used that philosophy on whatever I do. And it's kind of like a double-bladed sword, because whenever I start a new hobby, I want to go balls to the wall, If I start archery, I want the best bow, right? To be the best. And it's like I have like this ADHD where I hyperfixate on a lot of different things. And I'm surprised, I'll be 100%, that I've lasted podcasting this long, because my younger me, right? Like the me in the past that was younger, but old, right? He would have probably quit, because he would have just jumped onto the next thing. You know what I mean? But I think that's something, as you grow older, you become a little bit more, right? You start to mature, and you start to really, now I'm about to be 30, bro. So, you know, I got a family, I got all this stuff, so I'm just chilling, but here we are. And something I want to talk to you about is alchemy, right? And what's your definition on alchemy, Ben? How do you see alchemy? Are you down with the woo woo of alchemy? Are you not? Like, what's your definition of alchemy?
So it's awesome that we had this prelude conversation. Almost like it'll almost seem like this was pre-planned, right? But so for myself, the basic raw definition of alchemy is taking, when they say prima materia, it could literally be this leather glove, a plant for spagyrics, a piece of gold, whatever you're working on. So that's the prima materia. You're going to break that down into the finest pieces that you can break it down into. You're going to remove the pieces that are not useful, and then you're going to reunify the pieces that are left. And the pieces that are left is going to require a lot more explanation, which we're going to get into. Okay. So there's a process of breaking something down into its masculine and feminine components. And then there's also an understanding of, there's a solvent, which is the neutral zone. That's your mercurial aspect. That's going to allow two other pieces to come together. And then from there, the masculine and feminine are going to come together. Again, this is all going to require more explanation in just a minute. But where then also through that, as you're doing the lab work, you start understanding this philosophy of life, because as you're doing it, everything starts working that way. Everything, no matter how big or small, it all starts working the same way. So you start developing the as above, so below. You start understanding the more basic pieces of this realm and working with them. And once you start understanding the very first movements, everything else starts just becoming little more complicated versions of those same things. And you can really start working out the mechanics of this place, right? But you develop philosophies from that and understandings, and spiritually, as above, so below. You then take the things that work physically in this realm and understand the realm that we can't see is also moving in the same way. It's got to be a counterpart to this. And so you derive your understandings of what's going on that you cannot see from what you can see. And you can prove a lot of those things because you can make it happen. You can't explain necessarily why. Like at one point in time, you couldn't explain why the wind makes the windsock go, even though you can see that you can't see nothing. You know the wind's making that windsock do that. There's reactions that can happen that I know I can make happen, even if I can't necessarily explain it, and all kinds of things like that in science still today that they're like, well, we're not really sure why that's happening, but it happens. And they've taken now, and especially since Carl Jung. So if you look prior to Jung, almost nobody has alchemist on their resume. It's a very few and far between thing. Because back then, as you're going to see when I show you guys some of my stuff here, because as I'm explaining the actual breakdown of alchemy, I got some equipment here to show you guys. And that way, because Juan's very interested in actually doing this, so he's going to need to know what he needs to have. Some of these things, like a basic, this is called a heat mantle. And so what this is you put your flask or your alembic sits inside this. You can see that. And this one, I don't like it actually, because the temperature control is why I don't like it. So this is on a fluctuating where you set it at, like, say 90 degrees. It'll go up to 92 and then shut off and then drop down to say 88. and turn on. So you end up with this 4-degree variance, which is the way most of them are. But you can get a much nicer one that's off of voltage. So then you're just setting a constant voltage and you can really regulate and keep it at a real even temperature. Nice part of this one is it's got the magnetic stir. It allows it to stir, and you can drop a little pill in there and it spins it around and keeps your stuff mixed up. So it's, if it's trying to, separate and coagulate. But did you have this 100 years ago? No. That's when they were taking stuff like putting it in sand with a flame underneath it, so it's bathed in sand to try and keep a nice even heat on it, and double boiling. Like anybody that's cooked understands the difference between a double boil, where you took a pot inside of another pot, because the water then has a less temperature variance than, say, your wood stove or your gas stove. You don't get that just isolated heat spot. It gives it more of a envelopment of heat. So you had to do a lot of tricks that were real hard to do. Well, imagine this with when you're taking and doing fractional distillation, where I'm trying to separate out different levels of oil, and that 2-degree variance will make this. I only want this oil at 100 degrees, let's say, to vaporize off. And I want this oil that's 104 degrees to not vaporize off. Well, if I have this thing going, I'm going to get bits of this one in it. And I don't want that. That's not very efficient, right? So you guys can imagine 100 years ago before, or even 30 years ago, trying to get this equipment. Like right now is the best time to be interested in this, guys, because labs are going under everywhere. like I've been eyeballing some damn electron microscopes, scanning electron microscopes for like $3,000. These things, that machine was 5 years ago was $100,000 or more. Like straight up. And they're like hawking these things like they're garbage at this point, these labs going under. It's crazy. You just go to some auctions, some of the lab equipment, because who wants an electron microscope when all these different industries that had cropped up are gone? Nobody. Like, oh yeah, I got one of them in my garage. I use it all the time. Like I would, but not many people are saying that. So anyways, before all of this, that was a hard thing to do. So not many people did it. Well, then Carl Jung came in. And if you read Jung's work, Jung didn't practice lab alchemy. He skipped that part. He read some books from some guys that had performed alchemy and were lab alchemists. And then from the pictures in those books that the lab alchemists were using, he said, oh, well, those match my dreams, and I haven't found anything else in modern psychology that matches my dreams, and this looks like some of my dream stuff. And then he started making direct comparisons without having ever done the work, and things like that. Well, then from there, it just got worse and worse, because then Jung wasn't, he was actually an extraordinarily intelligent man. And I'm not saying his psychology was all completely horrible. I'm saying he wasn't an alchemist. But from there, obviously the derivatives of him who never did the work, by the time you get down to these school of young kids that run around, you're like, it's so far afield from real alchemy that now they've turned it in, because they've separated it from the lab. They can say anything they want. Anything can be meaningful and true, and any vision. Back then, it had to match the lab. Like, oh, hey, this vision is, I can see this reaction happening, and this is like this, and this is how this works. And now you don't need to have that. This is how it works. You can say, I can cure, just like you see people doing. They have for everything. If you just do this one thing and people buy it up, nom, 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 and then those people never are of everything. Like when it comes to reality, this is a problem, and our society's functioning, which I'm not criticizing that the dreamland. I'm not saying that's not needed. But I'm saying it always needs to be weighed and balanced. If I say I have the for an easy for that I can just hand out to everybody, well, now I need to go down here and get the root materials and produce that, and then manifest it on this middle plane that's in between the idea and the root. And now that it's in everybody's numb mouths and disappears, that was an awesome thing. Anything else is just right.
Mm-hmm. I'm on a weird boat, and I agree with you. And here's why I'm in a weird place right now when it comes to understanding alchemy. It feels like when I first started looking at alchemy, probably every now and again I would try to look into it, and I could never start. You know, when I first started podcasting, I really wanted to understand what these drawings were and what all this stuff meant, and I could never really wrap my mind around it. And so I would kind of start looking around, and then I'd drop in, then I'd start looking around, then I'd drop in, then there was the one time where I was like, you know what, I'm out to understand this. And I've been in that rabbit hole ever since, and I'm kind of peeking my head out every now and again, and I don't think I understand it much better than I did 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whenever it was. And I've been taking Adam McLean's courses in alchemical symbolism and alchemical text, because the thing about alchemy is you have the pictorial alchemy, I guess, right? The drawings, which you need to understand. You have the textual alchemy that you need to understand. And then you have the practical alchemy that you need to understand. And then you have to combine all that together to really grasp it 100%. And Adam McLean is really adamant about what you're saying, about going, hey, that's why it's Jungian alchemy. He took a whole concept out of alchemy and made his own thing. It's Jungian. That's why it's Paracelsian. That's why it's Familian, I guess, or it's you know what I'm saying. There's different schools of thought, which is okay, because part of this thing is taking the system and trying to make it work for yourself. But McLean is very adamant about saying, hey, don't project your own inner definitions to what you're looking at on this plate or what you're reading on this thing, because what you're saying, it's very matter of fact. Now, just because you don't understand it doesn't mean that it's cryptic and symbolic and whatever it is, although it is. Right? But it's symbolic of something very specific. Therefore, you need to read these texts in context. You can't take them out of context. So if you have a series of 12 plates, don't take one individual plate and try to break it down, because it's not going to make sense. And that's where I'm struggling, because if you have Atalantifugians, that's like 50 different plates, you can't just sit and talk about one. Hey, look how cool this plate is. Like, no, it's in sequence with the other plates. And that one's a weird one, because you have the music, you have the singing, you have the poems. So it's like, the first like multimedia presentation essentially to do with alchemy. But that's where I'm at. And I'm like, do I really want to get into practical alchemy? I don't want to just be boiling my piss to be able to, just in my backyard somewhere. I want to do something that has some sort of actual meaning to it. Like my son, one of my sons has respiratory issues, so maybe I can do some essential oils, like distill some essential oils and make my own, instead of having to go out to buy some or depend on somebody else that I don't know what the hell they're putting in it. You know what I'm saying? So do something that's actually going to matter versus just trying to be the alchemist. Like right now, dude, when I make my coffee, I got a siphon coffee maker. I feel like an alchemist, dude. I'll turn the little burner on at the bottom with the little butane burner at the bottom, and I'll watch it heat up, and I'll stir it, and then I'll just watch it go down again. I drink my coffee. I feel like that's as alchemical as I've gotten. But again, I want to be strategic in how I go about it, and I don't want to just be sitting there, and I want to actually make, maybe not spagyrics, right? I mean, what I want to do is spagyrics. I want to actually be able to use it for something, but I don't know. And that's why I hit you up, and I was like, hey, bro, what do you think? And the more I think about it, the more I go, you know what? Do I want to open up this can of worms, or what's going on? Where do I even begin? And what do I even buy? Because there's so many different setups. So that's where I'm at as far as like understanding alchemy. And I think it's almost like a breath of fresh air, because my view of alchemy has kind of sort of been tainted, obviously, right, with the homunculus and everything, and like this more supernatural, which is cool. Like, I love talking about that, because that's also another aspect of this. Like, these dudes could have been like superheroes that were trying, like Philip K. Dick. He's like, well, Pythagoras and all these mystery schools, and even the alchemists, their secret was that they were able to dilate time. They were able to step out of it. And that's what the Hermeticists and all these guys were trying to hide, right? And like that's like another aspect. Like, were alchemists at the brink of, he puts it that they were wanting to push evolution forward. Like they wanted to actually quite literally evolve themselves, right? To like this, I think he calls it a homoplasmate. And it makes me think of like when they would drink the tinctures, right? The elixir of life, and their hair would fall out and their nails would fall out, their teeth would fall out, and they'd grow back. It's like, were they transformed in some sort of weird way? Like what was going, or it could have been mercury poisoning. I mean, who really knows, right? Like they could have been poisoning themselves. So that's where I'm at right now as far as like understanding alchemy and
which does happen.
Yes.
You know, that's the problem with being this type of person. Like you guys don't even know my face, even though it looks pretty good. It's all scarred up. Like there's so massive amount of scars on my face where I've blown things up. Like one year I walked around looking like Skeletor, because that's part of why I wear a hoodie all the time, because then it's, rather than a lab coat and all that stupid shit, I wear a hoodie, and then it's minimal exposure and like just constant blowing yourself up. Something goes quite sideways. You didn't take something into account. You know, your mix was a little off. And then you got to test it. Like, and all those same factors are going to show up. Like,
the dose makes the poison,
yeah.
right? I mean, that's the whole thing about that.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
you're doing something a little bit different, because again, the way that you're doing it, you have a real world application for it. Like the stuff that you're doing, you use, or you do whatever, you know, obviously you do whatever with, but there's a real application for it versus what I said earlier. Like, it's like, how long do I need to masturbate for my homunculus to come alive? Like, how long do I need, like, do you know how long you got to do it to you know, to bring the homunculus forth? Like, you know, what's going on? So it's like, I want to do something with it, but I just don't know if I want to open up that can of worms. So what would you say to somebody that is trying to get into this?
So the very first thing, once again, and here's where okay. So a good explanation for just what's going on with Juan that he just explained. Thank you. And is, if I was to decide tomorrow to be a mechanic, and most of us, I guess, have been into a Napa or whatever, and you see a Haynes manual or a Chilton's manual, do you believe that you could go home and look through that manual and understand how a car works, understand anything in those complicated ass pictures? Like, now all of a sudden when there's a starter in this thing, I know it's a starter thing, but do you? Like, if you didn't know anything about mechanics, and further, could you read that book and then go out and rebuild your engine? Like, no. So do you get mechanic jokes? No. And then that's the thing that I despise about people that go on about like secret societies, like, oh, they're hiding it. Listen to those words. That same thing applies if you're a mechanic. I'm also an electrician. There's things like, as an electrician, like when I first was an apprentice, when my guy who taught me would say a jiggy, which isn't a thing, I had to know what jiggy meant and go get him the damn jiggy. Like, and it's because he couldn't remember the name of the damn tool, and all he could think of was jiggy. And then there's things that, like Whirlpool. Back in the day, the only hot tubs were Whirlpool, so there's some people that just call them whirlpools. You know, it just becomes them little terminologies from having a job or things like that. So for me, the very first thing you need to do is actually get into the lab. And when you go to do lab work, the first thing you go to do is spagyrics. Now, in the explanation, because nobody really cares about the levels of oil and things like that in like your cantaloupe, which it does exist in your cantaloupe or any plant. The same thing applies to every single plant. Cannabis, for some reason, you know, everybody loves their drugs, so they care about the levels of oil and drugs. Like, oh, look what the percentage of THC in this. Like, they know what that means. You know, so I like to use that as an example, because then at least people can relate. So you go and get yourself a screaming dog, and then that helps to do the whole thing. And he's part beagle. As he gets old, the beagle part's standing out. But you go get some cannabis, and you're going to start out, you have this nice, beautiful plant, and you can appreciate the plant. It is a very, like, some of the colors that come out in it and whatnot anymore, like, it's just amazing looking. And cannabis is very interesting. I don't know here, once again, where you have that break between the lab and today's stuff. But for me, if a plant is, to tell whether a plant is masculine or feminine, the masculine component is the salt. The feminine component is the oil. So if the plant is more oil dominant, it's a feminine plant. If the plant is like, say, rutabaga or something, well, that doesn't have a lot of oil. You get the water out of it. It's mostly just a dry thing. So that's going to be more masculine.
And this is while you're doing the operation that you find this out if it's masculine or feminine. And aren't cannabis plants hermaphrodites as well, or is there some strains that are?
See that now that gets into just when people get into the masculine and feminine part, they get so stuck in dicks and vaginas, they just can't get it out of their heads, right? And they will definitely go hermaphrodite sometimes. Cannabis plants will easily, but as a plant in and of itself, whether it's a male cannabis or a female cannabis, it's a feminine plant, because when I go to extract out of it, that plant is going to usually have a ton of oil and then very little salt. When you go to burn this giant plant down, you get this, like, say you have like a 3-pound plant, you come out with like a half cup of salt, and just a bucket of oil. So it's obviously a very distinctly feminine plant. Now, whether the plant in and of itself had a penis or a vagina doesn't really matter in this context. And this is again where it's, and whether it went hermaphroditic and used its own penis and its own vagina, like, get off the penises and vaginas, people. This is why you got to go back to the lab. So these confusions quit happening for you. And especially when they brought in Baphomet, which to me was a whole spell and is completely unnatural, because like I said, when I performed the alchemy process, whether the plant was feminine or whether the plant was masculine, it still is. I didn't change that. I isolated out the two components and then purified them and put them back together. I didn't change whether the plant was masculine or feminine overall. Like, that makes no sense. So once again, disconnection from the lab, do whatever you want at that point. You don't got to prove what you're saying. Anyways, you have this beautiful plant. Now you're just going to take, and you're going to understand that the beauty, most of the beauty you're appreciating visually is actually the carbon body. And you're just going to break that down and grind it up, tear it apart. And then at that point, you're going to introduce it to a solvent of some sorts. Now, whether that's water or alcohol, preferably if you're using, most people are going to use the alcohol method. So we'll go through that. If you're going to use alcohol, you want as high a proof alcohol as you can possibly get. Because when we're talking about a solvent, what the solvent, especially these are a polarized solvent, what this is going to do is pull the positive portion, the feminine portion, away from the body. And if there's already stuff in your solvent, say it's only 90% alcohol, only 90% can be filled again. And then further, when I go to extract from the solvent the stuff it pulled out, and I go to separate that back out of the solvent, that 10% that was in there, I take that also. That's also going to separate. Now that's mixed into my whole solution, and I don't want that. What was that even made out of? Was that corn alcohol? Was that some kind of crazy squeegees off the floor? Like, I don't know what quality of stuff went into that, and I don't want that in my end product of my pristine alchemy. Like, that makes no sense. So obviously, even if you do go buy store-bought alcohol, ideally what you're going to go then buy is organic red grapes. Again, you're taking a crapshoot on what quality they were making it out of what product. But You get some nice organic red grape wine. You distill that out, and then you're going to have to do that 6 times at one temperature, which will end up bringing it to basically like a 98% purity. And then you drop it down just a little bit. You're going to learn that in just a minute, why all that applies. And then that last distillation is going to take out the fineness. So it's 7 distillations of red grape alcohol, of red grape wine. Or if you really want to get good with it, you ferment the cannabis. You take the ethyl alcohol from that fermentation. You're going to have to ferment a ton of it. And then what the alcohol from that fermentation is used to do the extraction. And that's obviously the best, because then nothing in there isn't what the product that you want. You know, it's an entire symbiotic loop. But a lot of people don't want to do all that. Anyways, you're introducing a solvent. Now, what the solvent's going to do is pull the oil away from the plant material. So obviously, you're going to want to have used as fresh a plant material as possible. As an alchemist, typically, you're going to go pick your own plants, and then you want to do it before the sun gets up. Now, why do I want to do this before the sun comes up? When you're standing, if you've been in a garden, if you're standing in it, when the sun peaks the horizon, all of a sudden your garden explodes with smells, just like, wow. And it's the most delicate, amazing smells. That is your terpene level oil. And that terpene level oil is super volatile. Just the very early morning sun through the mist will make that disappear. That's that stuff vaporizing off. That's why you can smell it. And so you want that to be in the plant. So, and especially during a full moon, the full moon is when the oil is the most in plants. So you're going to want to pick it during a full moon cycle in the morning before the sun. You take it in. Now, most people are going to take and then put it through a drying process, and you want to slow dry it and get it so the oil stays in. But the first thing we want to leave the plant is the water. The water belongs to this earth. It goes back to the earth. Then after the plant is dried, and I don't do that myself, but I'll show you guys why later. After the plant's dried, and then that's when you can go ahead and put it in with your water or your alcohol solvents. So now we're going to pull out as much oil out of that plant material as possible. Then we're going to get, this one's really nice. This is an Erlenmeyer flask. I really like this one because what this is made to do, a lot of times you just get the flask in and of itself and it doesn't have this little nipple, and then you got to put another attachment right here because you're going to put a funnel on there, and the funnel has like a little grate inside of it, and you're going to put your plant matter and your alcohol on there. What this little nipple's doing is you want to put a vacuum on that, and it pulls. You can put a filter under there so it's pulling just the liquid through, and it leaves all that plant matter behind. So this one's real nice because then you don't need that little in-between piece, and you can just put the vacuum right to there. Really like that one. So that's going to separate the plant material and the oil. And then you're going to take that caput mortem or dead plant material. You're going to go ahead and set that aside. Or you can, one of the nice things about with that is to take it, especially if you were doing an alcohol solvent or other flammable solvent, putting it in a cast iron pot and chucking a little flame on it and letting it go, and because that's what you're going to do to it anyways. And you just burn all that up, let it burn off all the solvent, but you set that part aside. And so next we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a couple different ones. We're going to take when you hear the old alembic, today we just use, like this would be a round bottom flask, rather, than like with the Erlenmeyer, you can set that directly on the desk. These, as you can see, this is able to go right inside that heat mantle, and then sit there super nice and easy inside the heat mantle. You can get, this one's got two. Then you can either put, like, a lot of times what I'd like to do is put a thermometer or a thermostat in here, or a thermometer, and so I can see what the inside of the liquid is heating up to. Here's one with 3. You can do some different things. Anyways, then what you're going to do is you're going to put your liquid and your plant, your just liquid, now that you've separated that out, into here. And this is a distillation head. In case you got any, there's also a way you can, if you just making a hydrosol, you put plant matter in here, and then you can put another one in here, or put plant matter and another one in here. And as the water vaporizes it off, it goes through the plant matter. That's what this head's for. That's why it's got steel wool in there. So I wouldn't necessarily use this one if it was just cleared out. Where's my head for that? I've got, oh, here we go.
So we're going to capture that's what in these alchemical paintings is that white smoke type of thing going up, right? It looks like sometimes it's
vapor.
Like the vapor, right? There's different depictions for it, but essentially that's what you're going to capture when you're distilling something. Yeah. It's, you break it down, and then that solution that you made is, you're going to capture the vapors from that. But you mentioned earlier fermentation, and when you ferment something, don't you need to introduce yeast? Does that change? Will that be able to contaminate your solvent, or?
So this is no, when you're doing the fermentation, and this is part of why you're going to have to do quite a bit of material. And this is one of the philosophical things that you're going to then debate after the fact, right? Is if you do a fermentation, and when we're talking about this type of fermentation, we're talking about an anaerobic fermentation, not an aerobic fermentation. Anaerobic fermentation is going to make like your kombuchas and like that. This is going to be an anaerobic ferment. Yeah. Exactly. With what everybody's freaking out about, worms. The nematodes, because they're calling it eels. Yeah, it's just nematodes, you weirdos. Like that's like take a soil class someday.
It's homunculus, bro. It got homunculus in there, dude.
Homunculus. Yeah, those are nematodes. Like it's in your soil, it's in everything. It's just a basic, like, okay, like the whole community that goes on about those what are those little in the water, they did some fermentation on the water, and they're like, oh my god, it's got evil creatures in it. Like, if you read about the archaeus of water, which was basic alchemy, where you just went out and caught rainwater, and this was hundreds of years ago, you go in and you can watch as you ferment the water, a little biome appears, and little lives appear, and then other little lives come and eat those little lives and eat more little lives. So what yeast really is a fungus. And it's a fungus that will grow in a non-oxygen environment, as opposed to like a mold that grows in an oxygenated environment. And people eat molds all the time. They just don't realize it. Oh, yeah, baby. Like, if you like any type of Asian foods, you're eating mold. Yeah.
I love my mold with some shrimp.
Yeah, exactly. You like you some soy sauce? You like you stuff like that?
Wait, soy sauce is mold, bro?
Oh yeah. You need to learn about that. Like, people don't even realize the things that they eat and do.
Dude,
like, it's crazy.
Hold on. Soy sauce is mold. Right? There's no way, dude.
Oh,
no. Let's see here. Oh my god. So here's where things get interesting. The next ingredient, and one that's crucial to the umami flavor development of soy sauce, is mold. It's added to the cookie dough, then fermented in a solution of water and sea salt. The scientific name for the mold is aspergillus and is better known as koji. Bruh. That's crazy.
Learn how to ferment some cold modes, baby.
My wife is half Japanese, so we be putting mold on everything, son. The rice, the sushi.
Loving you that mold.
That's crazy, bro. This is wild.
Yeah. So, with yeah, this is its own area that you spend years with, right? Learning all these different things. And so the difference, between an anaerobic and aerobic, and then breaking that down, and then even further, like your ferments, like you do a ferment for like mead. I just made mead, and then I'll turn around and vinegarize that, which is another enzyme reaction that happens after the alcohol reaction. So it all gets made into alcohol, and then so anyways, we've got this mixture of just alcohol and plant oil, with cannabis plant oil. And we're going to take, and we understand that there's 3 different levels of plant oil. And that's part of, this is going to actually have fluid. You can kind of see when you look at that this center tube is not really attached to this outside tube. You see how that's kind of different? Because this is meant to actually carry temperature in it. And that way, after you vaporize this off, well, obviously what that is just a heat reaction. We've gotten it to transform from liquid to gas. And now I want it to go back to gas, or back to liquid. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and run some cold fluid through this, antifreeze, whatever. And that's going to make that reaction happen here now that we've taken and grabbed out the liquid. Now, we also, on my systems, and this was something that wasn't necessarily always available back then, is I'm going to put it under vacuum. And so people need to understand that in order to convert liquid to gas is almost entirely dependent on atmospheric pressure. I can take water and boil it at room temperature, and you can find videos of this. You just put it in a sealed chamber and start pulling out the atmospheric pressure. And now that there's not atmospheric pressure, that water converts to gas like nothing. It takes no heat. The only thing the heat needed to do was get it to bypass that atmospheric pressure on top of it, and it converts no problem. So and we all understand, like with cooking, if I take and I scorch the oil, if I take butter and I put it in the pan, I scorch the out of it, my food's going to be all scorchy buttered tasting. It's not going to be good. And you can't take that scorch taste out of the oil. It's there forever. So the less heat I put into this, the more intact that oil is going to stay. Hence, I'm going to take and pull all the atmospheric pressure, because that's part of why with these sanded glass fittings, look at that. That's tight. No,
that's a nice tight seal right there, bro.
Yeah.
And that's what you use your dry ice for the distillation process, to cool it down enough to where is that what you use the dry ice for on that?
I'll show you later.
You said coolant.
It would never make sense for this system. Yeah. In like a billion times what I run right here. This is like, for me, while most people can't hardly imagine, this is like an at-home play kit for me.
Okay, I got
at this point, I'm so far,
That's the homun kit.
This thing right here. Yeah. This is the little baby homun kit. So now that I can do that, first I'm going to pull the alcohol out, the solvent. And this is another area of contention that I have with a lot of a lot of alchemy texts. If I was doing, say, metal alchemy, the solvent I would use would be acid. I would not put that acid back into my end product. The solvent for me is the negative aspect of the feminine, because it's natural, because that yeast. Oh, this answers the yeast question. The yeast, you can take any kind of food, and as long as it's broken down enough into its sugar, it's going to ferment. Like you take potatoes are kind of hard. It's kind of a myth that most vodka is not made out of potatoes at all. Potatoes are hardest to ferment, because you got to get that starch to break down into a sugar before it'll actually turn around and feed a fungi in order to ferment. And it's super hard. Like you've got to boil the hell out of potato mash in order to make it to a feasible state to convert that over.
I'll take your word for that. I'll take your word.
And yeah. Anyways, most things, you convert them fairly easily. Like say you even just go take and pick some berries out of the forest, throw them in a bucket, come back and just leave them in a warm, but seal the bucket so it's not getting an open exchange of air. You come back in a couple months and open that up and it smells just like alcohol. You're like, woo! Like you didn't add yeast. You didn't even add sugar. The yeast and sugar you're adding is in order to increase the alcohol production. Because most of us, if we're making an alcoholic drink, we want that more alcohol than is naturally going to happen. This is one of my contentions with, as heathens, they showed people as Vikings and whatnot as these drunks that ran around drinking mead. Well, back then they didn't add sugar, and they didn't really even have access to sugar. They only had honey, and they didn't add in yeast. So you were getting a very low alcohol ferment, but it also made that fruit so you could store it without refrigeration, because alcohol don't need to be refrigerated. So now you got this whole thing of say 3% alcohol, and you can eat that and you're not getting drunk. It's, just storable that way.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways.
So more practical when you applicate, like more for the time, it was practical for them to be able to, to do it that way. Absolutely.
Even for me, practical. If I have a whole orchard, what am I going to do? That fruit, we all know that most people just let that that fruit just hits the ground anymore. Well, because what am I going to do with it? It'll be rotten in a week. Well, rather than let it go rotten, you just peel it out, take the fermentable parts, throw it in a jug of water, stopper it, and now that stuff's good forever. It'll ferment on its own. It won't be horribly alcoholic, and now I can be eating that the rest of the year without putting it in a fridge, so I don't need refrigerator space. I don't need extra power. I live off grid. These things are important to me.
That's sangria, right?
Yeah,
that's essentially sangria.
Yeah, super easy, right? Or even sauerkraut or anything like that. All these things are just a basic fermentation that takes something that I would have had to put in a fridge or in some type of storage, and now I can just put it in a jar and it'll stay good for a very long time. And I can just put it out in my storage room here. Again, I live off grid. This is important. And all these people that their idea is all they can live out of is their fridge. They never even heard of a fridge, so they had to live different.
Mm-hmm.
And so wild yeast is a thing. You just don't get very much alcohol. So now if I'm going to take say I want a gallon of cannabis alcohol, I'm going to do it off of wild yeast naturally, I'm going to have to ferment a whole ton of cannabis and extract out a whole bunch just to come up with that gallon, right? Which is part of why I said all that at the beginning. But anyways, now we took the alcohol out. So now we've got nothing but oil in here. And so we're going to start extracting the different levels of oil. And even when we were doing the alcohol, we all know is very volatile, burns very easy, and vaporizes very easy. So I don't need to turn this thing's heat up very much to get that alcohol to come ripping out and separate it from the oil. So I'm not going to use much. And now this oil is going to sit down there perfect. I'm going to rip out just alcohol. I am, eventually going to redistill that alcohol and then use it again. That's the beauty of this whole thing, to do the same thing later. So you can keep reusing it once you do have said gallon, without a horrible amount of loss. But now the most volatile of the oils in a cannabis plant is, as we explained earlier, that terpene level. That terpene level is super volatile. So that is going to require just a little bit more temperature than the alcohol did. And so you're just going to crank up that heat just a little bit. And then we're going to throw one of these on. Burp.
Is it weird that we're talking about fermentation and somebody in the Telegram just literally sent a website about organic fermented products?
Nice. Nice.
Literally, bro. It's weird. What time is it? Yeah. Well, they just came
that
through.
That is freaking awesome.
That's a weird synchronicity right there.
Dude, this has been waiting to happen. Like that whole story at the beginning, that was just telling me that it just wasn't the right time for us to do this.
Yeah.
And now is obviously the right time for us to be doing this. Also, if you want, you can this is a triple head. So this is called a cow. This is a single cow the triple cow, single cow, triple cow. And then you can put this, even the cow has this. This is to put the vacuum on, so I can pull away anything that's not been converted to oil. So any residual, say there's alcohol in there that didn't quite come out because I'm an impatient. You know, I say I was being an impatient. I'm going to hit. Then I put a vacuum line onto this. And that's going to pull out any residual solvent that stays gassed. But the oil, so I didn't want to make this too cold. Don't want to make that too cold because you want that solvent, any residual solvent, to be able to come out in this line right here. And I can put 3 of these bulbs on this triple cow, like I said, and then I can rotate it.
And you just run like a little vacuum pump? You just run like you just plug the...
You have to run a pretty impressive one. Yep, just a vacuum pump. Yep, and then this line actually will go to another piece. I'll show you that. Gotta get some things out of my lap. So this line, imagine all this. Well, then that solvent, anything that's still gassed off, still in a gas phase, will switch over, and this line here will go. This line here will go to actually to this bottom right there. So these two will kind of connect together. So anything that's gas in here gets sucked up into this. And then there's actually another vacuum line on this. Now this piece here, you can see is hollow and filled with glass. It's like glass inside glass. That's why you can see that little cone in there. So you fill this with dry ice. And then that will, also with the dry ice, then that will sit on top of this. So now anything that can convert to gas, from gas to liquid, once again, is going to drop into this bulb. And you can get any kind of residuals to drop out into this. And then out of this one, this is what actually attaches to the vacuum pump. And then that should just be air that you're pulling out or pulling away the atmospheric pressure. So hopefully everything else from the experiment turned and converted back to liquid through this process of a couple different chiller attachments to turn that back to liquid, so you're not sucking solvent or oil into your vacuum pump.
Yeah, that wouldn't be good.
Not really ideal. No.
And would this be considered? This would be considered wet path, right? You know, like the dry path, wet path. Would this be wet path stuff?
Yeah, I can't stand dry path. The only true dry path that there is, I know that there's some stuff out there that says something other weird things, but a true dry path is basically a rosin press in cannabis terms. And again, with that whole
where it
thing,
heats up and then it just compresses it until it starts leaking out of the.
Yes. Okay. It starts forcing the oil out of the material. And again, with the whole volatility of the lower level terpenes and whatnot, that's part of why you'll never get rosin that just naturally comes out looking like this. Like after they've pressed every bit of terpene and whatnot out of it, then yes, eventually it'll get down to where the oil in itself, just like olive oil, is clear. Oil is pretty clear. You can actually pull the color out of most things, except for the life. You can still even pull that out because the oil. Here's where I have a disagreement because I do a ton of extraction. And when you start doing enough extraction, you start learning about different solvents and whatnot. And then you start learning about things like carbon exchange. Like depending on what solvent I use, because like an alcohol, what makes it an alcohol is that it has a carbon, a hydrogen, and an oxygen. And then depending on how many carbons there are, and then there'll be a little matrix of oxygen and hydrogens around it. And all the different alcohols are like that. That's what every alcohol is. So then depending on how many carbons are in that matrix tells you whether it's pentane or hexane or it's an ane. you know, like it, then it's just telling you it's alcohol. Then you start learning about hydrocarbon gases, which you can make into a liquid, like butane, propane, things like that. Well, that's just hydrogen and hydrogen and carbon is the only thing in that matrix. So then again, depending on how many hydrogens it is, like butane or propane, depending on how many it is, that's how many carbons are in that matrix of the molecule. So if it's only got one carbon, then it really doesn't have anything to exchange, right? I don't really like things with oxygen in the matrix, and because oxygen is what does the degrading in things like oxidation. That's basic stuff. So I don't really like solvents with oxygen in the matrix. So I really prefer hydrocarbon gases because there's just hydrogen and carbon. And then if you pick one like butane that's only got like two carbons, you can't really get an exchange of anything. So it's a really pure extraction, and you're really surviving off the polarity of it. Once again, I'm not using secret languages. I just work in a lab. Like, so if you do the lab work, you understand what's being said. That's just how this works. Anyways, I've got this broken down into the 3 levels of oil. Again, with the dry path, I've really damaged the most volatile level. Oh, at
because
this point,
it heats
I think
is it because it heats it up too much because of it's compressing it at the same time while you're heating it up, so you're gonna get that. What would you call it?
Dude, the morning sun through the mist. The morning sun through the mist made that stuff disappear.
Yeah. So it's very sensitive.
Like,
so what's the purity between a dry path extraction versus the way that you're doing it? Because it seems like a lot more work the way you're doing it versus the rosin press. You just press it, and you got guys. I've seen guys with freaking 10 presses, 10 on each side, 20 presses down each side, and they're just dripping that stuff. Just boom. You just see it constantly flowing. Is there a purity difference between the hard pressed one? And I'm wondering, how did alchemists have like a roller or something that they would roll their stuff to? I don't even know what dry path would look like as far as the alchemical sense. Like for like an ancient alchemist is what I'm saying.
That's what I'm saying. I don't really think, maybe like a few things that might have existed, like that were super juicy, like grapes, where I could see a dry path grape extraction where you step on it and the grape just explodes with its insides, and all the oil just comes rushing out. With most plant material, like cannabis, I don't really see it, and I wouldn't say that there's a better purity out of wet path or dry path. I think you have a chance of less purity with the wet path if you're not good at it. But with the dry path, you are definitely degrading the material. You're losing your terpene level. And like even doing it like this, like I'm showing you, which is your basic way. Here, I'm going to show you guys a little video quick. It's before, and I will, so that way I can...
You pull up you know how to share your screen? And I'm looking here, the different paths here. I'm trying to see if I can find a plate that's depicting like some dry path stuff, but there's not really anything that I'm finding. But it is a thing though. I've seen it.
All right.
Here we go.
Okay.
Let me know when you want me to pull it up.
So, yep, go ahead and pull it up, please.
I don't want to pull up your furry porn collection, so.
Yeah, I do like animals. And furry, it's cold in the winter. It is cold. Hey, homunculus man, don't tell me you don't have some. So this is my lab. Now
I can't see it playing. On the right, if you're playing it, is it on another screen or something? Because I'm seeing the folder.
Yeah, a little screen popped up. You bet.
I see your folder. I see your downloads folder.
Oh, weird. And it didn't pop up the video when I did it? When I clicked it?
Did you get the right?
Let's see here. Try this again. All right. Present. Share screen. All right. Now that it's already popped up, we'll just do the media viewer itself. How's that?
I think that should work. There we go. Awesome.
All right. So this is my lab now. Okay. Now this blue machine, and I know it's kind of ugly, but the ones that you buy at the thing, it's like a $15,000 machine, and it didn't really work right, so I had to tear it completely apart and rebuild it myself so it would work. And this is actually for my temperature control in the spots that we talked about, because as above, so below. All these, whether it's in those little pictures, whether it's an old man still of a copper pot sitting on top of a little stick fire, that's going into some coils. Them coils are to cool the vapor, and that's why you have to put the running water around it in the barrel and then dripping out the other end. It's all the same. It's just how regulated, how fancy and refined can you make it. Well, because I want to catch them super volatile terpenes, the super volatile ones in plants, and get that before the morning sun stuff into a bottle. You feed this full of dry ice, and then this pumps into this jacket and this is filled with your solvent.
So we're looking at the larger commercial size version of what you were showing us in the glassware.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, like 1,000 times bigger or something. So this is going to be, instead of your little bit of alcohol, this huge tank is going to hold like 100 gallons of it. And now these things right here. So this is your solvent tank. This is what's going to hold whatever the solvent that we're going to put over the plant material is. Again, that's an entire discussion on understanding, but this freezes the solvent down. That's basically all this is doing. As you can see, that's just an alcohol antifreeze mix that's going through this jacket and not touching the solvent at all. Then you fill these giant tubes with your plant material, whether it's lavender, no matter what it is. And there's a jacket again on the outside of these, and you can see the tube running there for that. So you can freeze that down also. So basically, if I can go out in the morning before the sun hits and I take that plant, I will actually throw it in dry ice, and that freezes the plant to where it's like, like negative 150. Dry ice in a slurry is negative 150. That thing didn't even know it's dead yet. And so you take that super live plant and you put that in there, and then you run solvent over that. This plant hasn't even had time to die or understand that it is. And these whole T's of valves is just allowing me to control which tube I go to and which tube I'm doing whatever with and where it's coming out. So then this is going to go, after I've flooded the solvent through, now it's going to go into this. This is just a catch tank is all we call this. And this catch tank is also jacketed, and this jacket's going to go over to a heat element. And so here is what is going to be just like where our first alembic was. Like the whole first part was where we went and separated everything into that Erlenmeyer flask. And now that we've got it down to just liquid and just that solvent and plant oil, well, that's what we got here. So and then rather than have it on a mantle, this thing is jacketed. So the whole thing can be flooded with a liquid. So it's a built-in double boil type system. So it gives it a nice even heat. You can put it, run whatever temperature fluid through it, and it's going to give it a real nice even heat.
But it's hot though, right? I mean, how hot does it get?
Yeah. This part's hot. Well, it depends. It depends on what you're doing. Are you just trying to separate out the solvent? Well, you don't. Butane, that's a beauty of butane. Butane vaporizes off at negative 20. You don't even hardly need to make that hot. You just need to keep the butane, because as the butane's vaporizing off, it does exchange heat. So when you vaporize something, like if you put like when I was in the army, you'd take, when we were over in Saudi Arabia, beer is illegal. And so you just take beer out into the desert, you pour some gasoline off the outside of the beer, and as the gasoline vaporizes off, it chills the beer down. Well, the same thing happens as the butane's vaporizing off. That exchange of from gas into liquid pulls heat away, because now the energies went with the vapor, and now what's left is now colder. And so you just kind of got to mitigate that. Or if you want to exchange out faster, you do. But remember that terpene level's in there, and that's a very volatile oil. So you don't want to suck that up. And so you want to do this at a fairly chill temperature. Again, which is part of why then there's going to be pumps in behind this to pull vacuum on it, so it doesn't require much to convert it. And here's those pumps. And obviously that's a little bigger than the vacuum pump you're probably thinking of or talking about.
Yeah.
That's just the actual head. The motors are hanging down below. That's just the pump head.
Yeah, I was just thinking of like an,
like an AC. Move a few cubic feet. And
like when you fix your AC in your car, like those type of little pumps.
Yeah, like little things like this big.
Yeah.
Has a little handle on it. And yeah. No, that'll work. That's perfect for this glass setup. Not so much for mine. These will actually move 6 cubic feet a minute each.
Golly.
And convert it from and push vapor. Yeah. So this is the heater unit that will heat that jacket on the catch tank, is all that is. So you want that. That's gonna take that frozen liquid and warm it ever so slightly. Well, after it's been warmed, now it's turned into the gas phase. And here's where a lot of energy gets taken up, is converting it from gas back to liquid. Where before on that glass setup, all we needed was this little bitty thing right here, and that will convert this. Well, on industrial, you need something more like this. And this whole thing is just filled with coil. And you just put the whole thing outside of it with dry ice and alcohol slurry that's negative 150 degrees, and it pushes that vapor actually from the bottom up, and then it comes back down because the coils are going up and then down, because the one set of coils is inside the other. So you want to push it the other way so it's all come liquid when it comes out. And you also don't want it to vapor lock, which means that these pumps have pushed too much vapor and it's not converted into gas, and now it builds up pressure and can't convert. So you've got to fill this thing with dry ice to get it to convert down to gas, so it can get pushed back over into the solvent tank and get reused, like we talked about with the alcohol before.
And it gets pushed over there to until there's no more of it, until it's just like you've already taken everything out of it.
Yeah, until all the solvent's gone, which I don't actually take all of it out, because then that's actually leaving a little bit in allows me to then take that mixture and separate it into component pieces. Like you can see, like on this, like this is this is all oil, but see how the oil separates from the oil.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens really easy if it's still got a little bit of solvent in it, because then you can keep it in the cold, and the three levels of oil kind of naturally gravitate and separate, and then you can let the last of that solvent off, which is actually how you crystallize. Because then as the liquefied oil starts coming back together into a same component pieces, they start, if you do it right, they'll align together and then they'll crystallize, and it's awesome.
How long does this process take from at least this part here? Once you have everything loaded up and you start cranking, you turn on the vacuum pumps and everything, you start cranking the heat, how long does everything take from beginning to end?
I can take and run all 4 of those of plant material in about 2 hours.
Interesting. So it's not that long.
Jackal.
And do you...
No, my system's pretty screaming.
Do you wait for the full moon while Saturn is in retrograde and time it just right? Do you do all that when you're running this thing, or you just send it?
It depends on what I'm trying to do. I mean, am I just doing bulk? And here's the thing. And this is what everybody always needs to understand. If you're buying something commercially made, no, I can't do all that and make something commercially. Do you want, did you just show up at my house with a literal pickup load of lavender, like literally like 1,000 pounds of lavender, and you want me to get this process? No, I can't do it all at the right time and in the right conditions. I can only push so much through this system at once. And now do you want that plant material to sit for the next 3 years and degrade while I'm waiting for the right time over and over again? And you can only do little bits at that specific time. Or are you asking me to do make you one jar of medicinal and made under the correct conditions, and you're willing to pay the more premium price, understanding you're locking down my specific time at very specific hours, and I need to do very specific things? Which one? Like, so you both. I sometimes I do one, like when I made Cheney some medicine. Yeah, that got done right. Mm-hmm. You know, if you show up in my house and again, I lived right next to a lavender farm. Hey, can you make us extract this? Here's a freaking pickup load. No, it was done as well as possible without the astrological implications taken into account.
Yeah. No, because that's an important part of, right, the alchemical workings. You need to make sure that everything is lined up astronomically, I guess. But I know space is fake and gay, so that's besides the point. But it is part of every single plant, every single material has that planetary connection, right? So that's depicted in these arts as well. So I was wondering if you did stick to that. Obviously, right, time is money, so there's no time for that.
So like I said, both. Like I said, both I do and I don't. It just depends on what you're asking me to do or what I'm doing. So then these last things, this long looking skinny tube on the left, and then actually this tank right here. Sometimes plant material will be, did you just hand me a truckload of lavender that, was jammed into the back of a truck and you mistreated pretty poorly, and you got some aphids and you hit it with some fungicides or some herbicides or whatever to try and, some pesticides for the aphids. What did you put on these plants? So depending on what happened, if the oil got some little extra residual garbage in it that I don't really want in the end product, I can fill this with cleanser, carbon, bentonite clay, zeolite, different media compounds like that will grab on to some of these pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, chlorophyll, any residual lipids that you don't really want in the oil itself. That's just fats that are in the plant, which is actually kind of a solid matter, but it will convert in heat. It will get runny in heat, but then it'll really, just like butter, you get out the fat and you end up with that really oil, just pure oil, and it doesn't solidify the same way. Same concept. And this will take them lipids out. Depending on which media you put in there. But so anyways, you can run it through this tube if required. You don't need to. And then this you can fill with different filtration medias. And then this is just another catch tank for after the filtration, if that was a required thing.
And everything comes out, right? Like everything that's supposed to be distilled or extracted is extracted, and then everything, like you're saying, do you identify the contaminants like yourself? Like you've done it long enough to where you're like, okay, there's some funky stuff in here, so let me run it and and it's just like a filter.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just a filtration. And then here's furthermore, with as much as I do and actually do the lab work, here's where some of the philosophical differences that I have that do end up happening. Because I'm able to extract the way I am, where the plant, like I said, was like, and it's frozen. most people think that the alcohol needs to be back into the final product. And for me, the alcohol was just the solvent. Because again, I can use butane, propane, I can use hexane, all kinds of different things. Do you want to drink that? Do you want that inhaled? Do you want that in your body? No. And so why would I leave ethyl alcohol in there just because that was the solvent? Like, it doesn't make sense. That was doing the negative extraction. Well, when I can take a plant that's still alive and I do the extraction on it, the oil that comes out is this screaming bright yellow. If the plant was green, there are like purple plants and things like that the oil, it was purplish. But if it's a green plant, which is 90 some percent of plants, that oil is a screaming bright yellow. It's almost neon. And if I let the plant dry and even done well, real well, and extracted right after curing, because you don't want the water in your final product, then it's more of a gold, not a neon yellow. Like that screaming life element's like kind of tamed down. If I let that plant matter sit around for a couple months before I get around to doing the extraction, it will move from a gold to like a dark yellow. And anything past that, it starts turning red and then black. Now, I can remove that color through the distillation process, but my contention is that color is the life in the plant. And that was actually in the oil, that the sulfur element is inside of the oil. That's why you see so much art depiction where the mercury and the solar element or the etheric element are together, and they kind of come together, and it's almost hard to distinguish one from the other. Because for me, then, hold on, this is going to get further and deeper. What we've done entirely through this process is we've taken that life or that sulfur element, and we've taken and let it pass through the oil. Because what the oil did was, as a solvent, open up the salt. The salt was blocked and closed. So in your different depictions, that's the soul trapped in hell to a block. It's always to a square with the chains, and they're trapped. The solvent, the mercurial element, opens that up and allows that information, energy to transfer back and forth now that it's not closed up. And now the sulfur element or the life can imbue the salt with life. Now the masculine element, so that salt and that sulfur was always just the masculine. The high, the sulfur, and the low were both the masculine. That's why they're polarized against each other. The masculine was broken. Now through the feminine element, which is the mercury, the masculine is healed, and now the completed healed masculine unites with the feminine and coagulates into the stone. So what we're going to do now that we've pulled out all the solvent and these other elements out of our oil, we're going to take the body and we're going to get down to that salt. We're going to take that caput mortem, that dead plant material, and we're going to put that in a crucible. Whether it's a cast iron pot or an actual fancy carbon crucible. And we're just going to burn that. And this is part of where Jung got his thing, where this is the stages of burning down the body, where the plant material, when you first scorch it, it goes black. That's the blackening. And that's the carbon rising up out of the material. And then carbon's weird because it's a solid and it can be vaporized. It's a really weird one. It's right in the middle. That's why we live on this carbon plane. Everything here is kind of weird like that. But the carbon leaves now inside the cellular material, which is a lot of time your lipids, your fats, your cellulose, cellulite, your cellular wall in which all the life had happened. There's still left the salt. And so we need to get that to come together, because the masculine side, where we talked about wanting no heat for that feminine side, turns under heat. The masculine side thrives and comes together under heat. You put a man under pressure, he doesn't crumple. Like that. That's what they need. And so the masculine side starts coming together. And so then there's that's where the yellowing and the reddening, and you can see as you're applied heat inside that white mass, there'll be a yellow and a red glow where the salts are actually coming together and crystallizing and forming, and everything else is getting pushed away from those particles. Then you're going to take and you're going to mix that with distilled water. Back to the whole solvent talk. We have to use distilled water because now water is being our polarized solvent. We only want that salt out of the water. We don't want all the rest of that was in your tap water to come out when I go to take and do my experiment on it and get the rest of this out. So we're going to mix it with distilled water, then make it into a nice slurry. And the salt, being water soluble, is going to mix into the solvent. And then the ash, not being water soluble, is not. So back to the old Buckner funnel. And Buckner, we put the funnel up there, put the matter in there, suck the water down into here. Now the salt's actually going to be in here because that was dissolved into the solvent. And then we're going to take and evaporate off the water, and this is going to leave behind the pure crystal. Hopefully not in this particular container. Hardest to get out of this container.
So
into something else,
the blackening, right, is when you have the toad chained to the bird, right? It's like that's the blackening, the toad to the bird. So from there you break everything down, and now you have, what color is it once it's broken down? The salt, would it be white?
The salt the salt itself, as it's glowing, when you're looking at the experiment, it's hidden inside the white powder. The white powder is cellular material. That's your ashes to ashes, dust to dust. That again belongs to the earth.
That's the white swan,
we got rid of,
the white eagle, or the skeleton in these alchemical plates.
Right. So the three things we removed out of the plant that are going to go back to the earth are the water, the cellular material, and the carbon. Now we're down to just oil and salt. And then actually there's some metal compounds that were left in there, which in my opinion, the Gnostics would refer to as then the archons, because that's how the archons affect you, is through the metals in your body. But that came out in the non-water soluble. Well, again, metal, not particularly water soluble. So you use a very finely distilled water, so you only are getting these salts, and we get to leave the rest of that in the top of that filter and chuck that into the trash, right? And then we're going to go ahead and evaporate off the solvent. We don't really need to catch water. So that one we just do in an open dish usually, and let the salt crystallize. Then we're going to go ahead, take the salt, and the oil. Here again is where my contention, and because I'm actually making the stone and not just making tinctures and whatnot, and my contention's about the alcohol. Why would I need alcohol in that? So the oil does the action of opening up the salt. Now here's where you got to find kind of a mixture, because depending on how much plant material you made, you don't want when it's brewing, it can't be too oily and it can't be too salty. If it's too salty, you'll see that it just kind of starts looking grainy and it doesn't have that fluidity to it, because the final stone under heat will be fluid and in cool will be solid, because it's got both masculine and feminine attributes now, because you've married the two and taken out all the middle. So and that's the determinative factor. Crystal, if I put heat to it, it just gets harder, right? It does not vaporize. Any oils, feminine side, I put fire to, they crystallize. Well, the philosopher's stone, which contains the salt, will now vaporize. That's the magic, right? The masculine side can now do the feminine tricks, and the feminine side can do the masculine tricks, and the whole thing is very symbiotic, and that's why the whole thing functions better, right? So, there's all kinds of philosophical you could talk about for hours and hours and hours, right? And it's these procedures, and while you're watching them for hours and hours, that these kind of thoughts start impregnating and formulating and birthing in your head, and these people that just read books, fuck that shit.
So
anyways,
me, no, you.
No, you are not. You now Brian needs to say shut up, and then we both turn and say, "Oh, this guy now." So you're going to, when you're doing the final product, you're going to stopper this up because you don't want, you just get a penny stopper. Where is my penny stoppers? And you're trying to move beyond just the books, brother. That's why you made me so excited. Anyways, you just put a glass stopper in here, and that way it can digest, because this is going to take a while. Like I said, the first thing that's got to happen is the sulfur, which was riding inside of the oil, has to pass through the salt and enliven the salt and free the trapped souls in hell and enliven it. And now then the alchemical marriage can happen between the masculine and feminine, because when we start out, that masculine's broken, so that whole action's got to happen first. So it's going to take a while. It's going to take some percolating, and then after that, the whole thing will coagulate. Well, the whole thing will become just liquid, but you will see the changes that are happening, and then eventually you'll see that it's done. Then you pour it out, and now it will solidify into a solid waxy substance. Just like this is actually just pure oil, and it doesn't matter. Like, you could touch it, pick it up.
What color is it at this point?
It's typically going to be about this color, a real nice clear, with a fine yellow in it. And it's going to be really, really vibrant and pretty. Now, again, this all depends on what plant matter you're working on. Different plant matters. If it was like a lavender, that pulls out a lot of purple in it rather than yellow.
So that's your yellow, your citronita stage, right? The yellowing stage after you let it sit for a little bit.
You betcha. But then when you take the heat away, that all disappears, and it's all going to be just a fine white powder that is just waiting for a solvent, and the salts are going to be hidden inside the ash. The salts is what you were trying to get out. So when you look at the tree of life, that's that centerpiece, that's the ego. Anybody that wants to watch my tree of life videos, never did say my stuff. If you want to find any current stuff, I'm only on Weaving Spiders Welcome on Saturdays, and I've taken back to doing interviews because I never really liked doing podcasts. I like doing my research, and I like talking about it, so I'm really great for interviews and doing my own podcast. I just don't have time for that. I like giving out the information, but this is a lot of work for anybody that doesn't know. Juan puts in a ton of work to do this, and I just don't have that. I can't. But I can do the research because I'm doing other work, hence why I know all these other things. And I talk about them and help teach them. But because of me doing the work, again, this is why I have some contentions on the way things are said and done. Like, for me, the alcohol in and of itself is the negative portion of mercury. It is part of the plant because it will ferment itself under wild fermentation without adding any yeast or sugar. So that is a natural thing that was entirely inside the plant. And they will try and say that's pulled out of the atmosphere. But if you're doing it in an anaerobic condition, then how is that even in there? And that's just a blatant blanket statement that you've made without any actual backing whatsoever. Like, the whole planet just has yeast everywhere, just floating, and you can't possibly have any environment without it. What if it was growing in an indoor situation that was extraordinarily cleansed, like we've seen with cannabis growers that, for years and years were hiding in a basement, basically growing cannabis in a bubble so nobody could smell it. What about that? Why would that also ferment? So to me, that's just a natural component of the plant that's going to happen. But when I look at the mercury then is the feminine. And the feminine has two aspects, the positive and a negative. The positive gives and the negative takes. That's why Mercury is considered tied to commerce, communication, exchange, anything where exchange happened. So if we look, the masculine positive and the masculine negative, we're not able to connect to each other in any way, shape, or form. It's just broken. Now with the feminine creates the pathway, just like we're talking about with the way the alchemical procedure ends up happening. And now that sulfur and salt can communicate, they can work together, and it's only through the feminine. So that's why she regulates, that mercurial figure regulates all your different pathways, commerce and whatnot. And then Mercury in and of itself doesn't have a positive nor a negative connotation, because it's only through taking on either the positive element and transferring it to the negative, or taking the negative element and transferring it. That's the only time. So now that other element besides itself is giving it. So just like in a battery, like where the anode breaks down, and then so before the charge happens, the anode breaks down and an electron jumps over to the cathode, which gives the cathode a negative charge. That cathode had a 0 charge, but now that it's taken on this extra electron, now it's a -1. So now this free ion that's floated out because an electron broke away now has a +1 charge, and this has a -1 charge. So of course this shoots over to this. That's just basic physics, right? You know, that's just how it works.
And so you've distilled. So at the very beginning, right? You pick your plants, right? Let's do an overview again. You pick your plants, you do the right procedure to kind of dry it out. You know, water goes back to the earth, et cetera, et cetera. You load up your machine, you do the distillation, and then you're left with essentially the dead plant matter, essential right? Oil. So you have your essential. You use that on the other side, right? You do whatever you do with that, and then you have this plant material. You said so. You take that, right? And then you break that down even further to create the stone, right? So
create the salt.
To create the salts. So how would you create the stone, like the stones? Because you were kind of going through the black, the white, and then the yellow. How do we get to I want the red. You know what I'm saying? Like, how do we get to the red?
The red happens is in that final salt stage. And so that means the salt has fully come together and it's ready to be removed from the ash. Now that salt's pulled all together, all the other pieces. The masculine side really needs the heat to pull it together. We're talking about crystals. So what happens for crystallization is that everything else that's been attached to that particular molecule gets burnt out. So usually it's a solvent that you've mixed it in. So that's why you hear like crystals form out of a slurry, like Karen B says. Then what's happening is this more volatile solvent, as it leaves, it becomes more and more pure of crystal element B. And so you had solvent and your crystal element. You know, it can be even quartz, it can be THC, it can be anything. And now that's becoming more and more pure as the solvent's leaving it. And so as that comes together slowly and hopefully slowly and without different weird vibrations into it, so it's only this that's affecting itself, it'll start aligning, and those particles will start aligning and crystallizing together. And that's what you're wanting in the masculine side. And then that's when you take and mix that white ash with the distilled water and put that back into the Buckner filter, into the Erlenmeyer flask, and then you let the water vaporize off so it becomes just pure salt crystals. So now this crystal side is masculine and this oil side is considered feminine, and that's usually where people hold at the alchemy. But inside that feminine is the sulfur. And that's my contention, is the sulfur is inside the oil. So there's the second masculine component inside that needs to reunite with the salt. And so now here's where that's where the alchemical marriage happens, where we put it in a sealed flask and we seal these components off. So that way, when we put this under heat, that stays liquid. And that sulfur is able to transfer through the oil into the salt. And then from there, the completed masculine side merges with the feminine side and completes the alchemical marriage. And in the alchemical marriage, this is the phoenix state, where literally now this thing has both masculine and feminine attributes. I can literally take this piece of stone of cannabis, and I can take it outside and roll it around in the dirt and get it as nasty and fucked up as I want. I can put it back in this flask and hit it with some heat, and it will literally distill out and be perfect again. And every time, over and over, because now, for some reason, now that we have united this, that masculine salt, which before under fire turned into this red crystal, now all of a sudden it's able to vaporize. They makes zero sense. And the feminine side is able to take on, rather than just be liquid and oily, is able to turn into a stone, because I've purified both and put them together. And now they exhibit both sides all the time.
So that would be the rebus, right? The hermaphrodite, the two,
yeah,
essentially. And the thing about Baphomet was, Baphomet, at least to Fulcanelli, he believed that it was a depiction of the magnum opus. He believed that it was the great work itself, obviously, and that's what the homunculus for some alchemists embodied. It was the perfect alchemical operation, like that it was the embodiment of a successful, all right, the magnum opus in some sort of weird way. So again, I don't know if they were actually making little, I believe that they were also making artificial life, but I do believe that they were, right? It's that's the thing with me. It's like it could have been how it couldn't have been. And now here you have the, right, you're talking about the phoenix stage, but before that, I've heard that it changes color rapidly. Have you ever experienced anything like that, where it's changing color rapidly, and that's where you get the peacock, which is the, so here you're talking about the conjunction. So I have the 3-headed dragon, white, red, black, right? And this is hermetically sealed, by the way. The whole time it's hermetically sealed, right?
Did she just let that cat in, or did that cat come from my? Okay, that's Bob. Yeah. Sorry, we have like some outside cat trying to get in.
That's Bob.
Yeah, that's definitely sealed. Yeah, that's Bob. Like, my wife thought it was a girl, so she named it Betty and used to sing Black Betty. And then they're like, no, it's a boy. And then they changed it to Bam Bam or something, and Bart, and then back to Betty, because she's like, no, it's a girl. And then finally one day I picked it up and I looked and I was like, that's a boy. And I was like, this is Bob. You guys need to quit with him. His name's just Bob.
Love it.
But yes, that's what I'm talking about, where rather than having that, I don't know why, where the hell's my penny stoppers? It's just a little thing like this, and it's closed up, and you just drop it in here. But that's what I was talking about, putting the penny stoppers in. This is hermetically sealed, and that way, because what's going to happen is during the alchemical marriage, the whole thing's going to turn liquid, and it's going to vaporize, and these components are going to be you're going to need it under heat so everything can be open. Mm-hmm. The masculine side's naturally going to be closed, and you need that to be open. And then some of these oils also at room temperature, a lot of times, especially when they're pure, will solidify and will be in more of a solid state. And for this whole reaction to happen, you need it to be open and hot. And you are going to see little bit of color change myself, because and see, now part of this is I also wonder if it's some of these older ones, they didn't experience some of the color change that they were having because of lack of purity in the materials, because I don't really go through that as much. So I just wonder if there was still more plant matter where by the time I'm done, like, that's literally, that oil is super liquidy. There isn't any lipids in there, none of that. So and lipids are part of the middle ground. They aren't part of the oil end. And it's only through some really refined alchemy that you find that. So I've always kind of wondered that. One of the differences between myself and a lot of alchemists is, so I ignored all of this, and I kind of got into this just doing my own work more and doing my own stuff and making, because I have Wilson's disease, and I had to end up learning how to make my own medicine because they were putting me on the 3 things that they do for Wilson's disease is they give you Klonopin.
What is that, Wilson? What does it do to your body?
I have grand mal seizures. Yes, I can't process copper correctly, so I get grand mal seizures. And so they give me Klonopin because I know everybody takes Klonopin, to get fucked up and be happy, but it's actually an anti-seizure medication. And so it wasn't made to make people happy. It was made to stop seizures, or at least bring your seizure threshold into a reasonable level. And then they gave me Seroquel, and then they would bleed you. That's the other one. They just go up and they have a little block that you put on you, and they go pop, and it puts a whole bunch of little cuts in you, and then bleeds you a little bit. And straight hundreds medical.
They did Rene Descartes dirty like that, bro. That's what they did to him. They bled him too much.
Yeah, freaking, and they still do that, dude. It's still if you look it up, that's how they treat Wilson's disease. They just bleed you.
Wow.
Your copper's too high. We're going to bleed you for a bit and get, hopefully that new blood doesn't have so much copper in it. But I started making my own medicines and whatnot, and that's how I got into this. And 20 years later of making my own medicines and doing things like that, I'm pretty good at it. And then I have some disagreements with some of the things that other people say. And that's, again, based off of I'm actually looking at things that are happening in my lab. And so some of the times when I see things in these symbologies, I'm not seeing the same things other people are seeing. Like the green lion for me is just a solvent. That's just the pure mercurial end of it. And it's eating the positive or the etheric ionic component. Because when you take anything like that, you got a positive and a negative, and then a medium. You look at a battery, you got anode, cathode, and then electrolytic fluid, which is just mercury. Well, mercury is just a solvent. The positive and negative were the same thing. Them are both the masculine. So I don't know why people don't carry this over into the alchemical thing. And further, where people talk about like the elements, like that's part of why I didn't bring the elements into the talk, because a lot of times when you're looking at your oils, then even when you're doing your distillation, you've got your fire distillation, your air, water, and then earth is going to be the caput mortem. And that's part of why classically you have them 3, that triple cow that's got the 3 different bulbs. So you can do the 3. I'm done with THC. I turn it. Next component, during it, next component. And for me, that's still wrong, because the earth is 0 for me. That's why the earth was in between the anode and the cathode. And so the anode and the cathode are polarized against each other. The salt and the sulfur are polarized against each other because it's the broken halves of the same thing. And so the middle ground, the earth, this carbon body was allowing that negative salt and that positive sulfur to reside here and give us time to work it out and get and reconcile those two things. So that way we could do the true perfect union. And that's the magnum opus for oneself, is realigning those two masculine components through the feminine and then merging the entire thing into the alchemical marriage. But the carbon body is what allows us to do that. So this is the mercurial components of this level. And brings back to the alcohol. That was the negative part. It allowed that to pull things out. The positive aspect is the oil. That's putting it back together. Mercury, like even inside the body with water, water's oxygen and hydrogen. Oxygen oxygenates everything. It breaks it down. Like for power to flow on this, like a battery, a basic battery, the anode needs to oxidize and break down. Degradation has to happen. And when that degradation happens, now it's a different thing when it goes to incorporate. So the oxygen did the oxygenation, and now it's hydrogen that's actually doing the incorporating. And this is the two different sides of the sacred feminine. Like as a heathen, our creation story includes the all. The all is one thing. Then it splits into the all mother and all father. That's a masculine and feminine, but still those two things completely balance each other out and there's no life. Then instead, the all father splits into two. And now there's still no life. Now the all mother comes in and takes the world of fire, Muspelheim, the world of ice, Niflheim, or the two sides of the all father, and pulls them together. And in that, destruction happens. And this is where it's fucking important. The destruction happens first. This is why in all alchemy, because it's those two things had to come together in destruction. And from that destruction, that's where life sprang forth. So the all mother's the destroyer and the life giver. And it's one action that she did. She's still the same person, still the same thing. It's the masculine side that was broken and split, and that she pulled back together in order to give life and give death.
That's the phoenix.
And
I mean, that's rising from the ashes, essentially. From that destruction, from that breaking down, you're able to project to its finest thing, right? I mean, that's the whole thing with putrefaction. They believe that new life arose from the destruction and decaying of this said thing, right? And I was, as you were going and explaining the processes, I was just trying to find the correct plates to depict what you were talking about. And I'm, as I'm looking around, these guys have different depictions of almost the same process, but not quite, because it's how you're saying. Not only intention is number one, right? What you're trying to do. The materials that you're working with is another one, right? The purity of those materials and how pure you stick to the to the process, because you can see where it could all go wrong. You're on the fifth out of the seventh step, you messed it up 2 steps back, you're gonna get a whole different thing. Now it looks like a toad when it's supposed to be a swan, and what do you do then? You know what I'm saying? So
ain't no going back now.
You got to ride it out. And that's why, again, it's something that I am debating whether I should even take on, because it is a lot of work. And it is something that is pretty delicate, you know what I'm saying? So I've been contemplating and thinking it over, and just the more I look at it, the more complex it seems to me. And I don't know, I might just have to try it. At least maybe I'll do the essential oils, that thing I had sent you, so I don't blow myself up, and try to extract some things that I can actually use for me and my family. You know what I'm saying? Like something actual of practical use versus.
So the thing that you sent me, it's a basic copper pot. Instead of copper, I got glass. It goes up. This is the copper pot has a little head, a little domey head. That's this. And then it goes into some coils. Them coils you're supposed to take and put water around. That's why, all the moonshiners in the mountains, they had to be next to a creek. So fresh, cold running water could basically be right here instead of the coils. I've got this thing. And then it falls out in the end, right there into this bulb. So no matter how fancy you get, like, this is still that same picture that you sent me. And with this one, I can attach vacuum. I can do a whole bunch of other things. So that way I can do it a little nicer. I don't have to put so much heat into it. I can separate the components out better. But at the end of the day, this, no different than what you sent me a picture of. And even that video that I showed you, no different than that. I've got one, just a copper ball sitting on a damn cast iron stove that's only about this big that you chuck twigs into, and it's got a coil at the end going into an old rickety barrel. It's the same exact thing, as above, so below.
I'm going to call you like, I blew it up, dude. I don't know what I did wrong. It just imploded on itself. I failed at step 5, dude. I don't know where I went wrong. Got to start over again. But yeah, I mean, I'll probably end up doing that, and maybe I'll either look up some recipes or something because we already use essential oils anyways. And again, like I said, we buy it from people, and maybe I could just make up my own. And like I said, I actually know what I'm doing and that intention. right? That intention that goes into it, that makes it or breaks it. You know what I'm saying? Like that whole thing. Like I heard you one time, and this has stuck with me. Like when you go eat at a restaurant that's just like a commercial thing, like it's just, go, 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 versus the cooking of your grandma that probably a few of her beard hairs fell in. And, that tastes a lot better because it was made with what? With love. You know what I'm saying? So like there's something about that alchemical process in and of itself that changes, even if it's placebo, it changes the outcome and the uses, in my opinion. And you said that one time, and that always stuck with me. That's alchemy essentially.
And especially when that salt is open, this is a contention I have, dude. We had so many conversations waiting ahead of us, brother. We just apparently had to wait till now. I talked about this with Emily Moyer. So when everybody's kind of looked at Masaru Emoto's work, right? And Emoto, it talks about the water having memory, but it doesn't.
I've heard about that guy,
the whole reason. Yeah. And he did all the experiments. His original experiments were where he went around to different areas, just took drops of water from different areas and flash froze them, and started finding really crazy, like if he took it from a monastery, it would show like really beautiful geometric patterns. And I think some of them, one of them even actually looked like the monastery. Well, then he started putting in his own input into it, and then finding out that if he like put different pictures and whatnot up to the water, then flash freezing it, that would show up in the crystallization of that water. What people kind of bypassed for some reason is before that worked out for him, he had to distill out the salts. And so he would distill the water, which removes the salts from it, because the water is just mercury. That's like the receiver. The sulfur end is the pure ionic energy. And so if you yell at water, you can see the water grab onto that but water doesn't remember. And it even says in his book, distilled water always makes a 6-sided crystal. And so, but with the salt in there, now it remembers. The water opens up the salt, and now it's got a memory. And so it's inside of that salt that the memory of things sit. But that memory is open to being viewed and to receiving while it's open. So when I'm doing my work, I actually, like most of my products, I put a little joy rune on there, which is the Wunjo rune. Because and then depending, is it a healing product? I might put different healing runes on there. Is it somebody's, wants to take something to help them, with confidence and
erectile
more
dysfunction.
Masculinity. Right, erectile dysfunction. Am I going to put a Turazaz on there, or an Urus, give them some ox power, so I'm going to implant that. Now, when these things are in liquid state, like sugar, and when you are purifying that sugar, you have to turn it into a liquid and then pull out and then recrystallize it. And that's how you're cleaning it, because it's only when it's in that liquid state that you can really take and run it through those medias that, like I showed you. But once it's in its liquid state, I can run it through carbon, whatever, and pull out anything that's not crystal solvent. So they're using the same I am. But if they take and they put really symbols like this evil, I'm going to take over the world. What are we doing today, Pinky?
You whisper to I'm going to take over the world. I'm going to, you just whisper some nasty stuff to your water, guys. Yeah, there you go. Talk dirty to it.
What are they putting in their symbology as this is in this flux state where it's able to take in those kind of symbologies, and then once it crystallizes, hold on to it. Like that was the last thing that thing's seen, that's sitting there right there. And so like for me, the next step of Emoto's work would be where I can take and find, because this is part of why I want an electron microscope. I need to find a very simple salt that's more susceptible to being overwritten than most. So a very simple structured salt. And I want to be able to, while it's in water, say I write a note, hey Juan, quit jacking off into chicken eggs, and slap it onto there. And then I send it, and then I dry it out. So it's now just salt crystals. I send it to you. You put it in distilled water and those crystals, take a drop of it and flash freeze it, and that message shows up.
So, all right, this is crazy. This is wild because it's salts, right? That attaches, or we're talking about it attaches to water, right? I mean, salt binds to water, right? In some sort of way.
Dissolves into the water, yeah.
Right? Dissolves into the water. We're talking about some MK Ultra. Like, what if, again, hear me out. This is crazy. Hear me out. What you're talking about, that's like implanted memory type. Like that what you're saying is like, you know, it reminds me of all the people they've caught pissing into the water refinery of the city. You know, like they take a piss. Like, why would you do that, bro? You know what I mean? Like all the stuff that they put into the
dark magic, bro.
Bro, not only like, okay, the conspiracy side, like of all the fluoride and like all that take that into account. Like take that into account as well. But what you just said about being able to implant memory into water, you know, that's wild, because if somebody consumes that how you said black magic type of stuff, that's crazy, dude. Because that literally binds to their body. We're made out of water, you know, like we're 70-something% water, so that would bind to our cells that's in our body now. So take that and extrapolate it out to the foods that you're eating, all the other stuff that you're like, dude, there's water in everything, man. There's like literally water in everything.
What does a dog do when it wants to own something? What's a dog do when it's going to go own something?
Pisses on it. Yeah. Damn, bro. Crazy. That's like, wow. And maybe that's what these alchemists are trying to portray with like, that's why sigils and talismans are so important too when it comes to this sort of work. And again, that planetary alignment, that plays a role to charge said talisman. So if and your intention that you're putting into it. I didn't even make the connection of like MK Ultra and alchemy, and yeah, that just blew my mind.
And that's just basic epigenetics.
Yeah.
It's basic epigenetics. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about epigenetic memories. There's something in the salt that's there. And so like when you look at the great work like Odin went through, that's why them high oils, their job is to open up the lowest salts. So I have 3 levels of oil, correct? When look at a cannabis plant, THC, CBD, terpenes. Now let's go ahead and look at because nobody gives a fuck about the salts. I don't know why this is, but people care about the salts in human bodies, but they could give a less about the oils. That them words don't come up.
Oils are the ones that are going to make you feel like a woman, Balderson. Those are the ones that are going to convert you.
Right. I want to feel like a woman. Yeah. I don't sing, but people know about the zodiac and the salts of salvation. I did a couple episodes on Crow with it. So there's 12 cellular salts. Now, everybody also knows that THC, that there's different levels of THC, and we've heard about the 4 different levels of THC. The same applies with CBD and with terpenes. So you have 12 levels of oil. Conveniently, you have 12 cellular salts. Now, each one of those levels, how do you identify that? Well, when we look at the human body, for instance, the 12 cellular salts are kali-phos, natrium sulf, kali-mur, calcium fluoride, magnesium sulfate or phosphate, kali-sulf. Oh, we had kali-phos. Now we got kali-sulf. Oh, do we have that again? Why, yes, we do. Over and over. And here's calcium phos, natrium phos, natrum sulf, calcium sulf. So it's calcium shows up 4 times, phosphate shows up 4 times, and then the only other word that's changing is the kali and the natrium. So it's just different forms of the same thing. It's actually one level, one box, and this one over here is phos, this one over here is sulf, so it's 1, 2, 3. And so 3 levels of oil equaling 12 oils opens up 3 levels of salt equaling 12 salts.
And this is making a lot more sense to me
Yeah.
now. Or Gerard Dorn, who happens to be your boy's favorite alchemist, Carl Jung, the most cited alchemist of Carl Jung, where he goes and he says, transform yourself from dead stones into living philosophic stones. Like you literally are able to project your own self into a higher, and again, that can get woo-woo, right? Project yourself into a higher being, whatever that may be. And maybe that plays into what Philip K. Dick was talking about, that these alchemists were at this border of being the next evolutionary into the next evolutionary step, right? Like they were pushing their, like we talked at the beginning, like their teeth are falling out, they were being transformed. It's like, oh, now I'm immortal, ha ha ha, like Count of Saint Germain or whoever, you know, insert immortal Fulcanelli. Like here I am, and this is making a lot more sense to me now that you're saying what you're saying.
And you look, the salt, like I said, has to be imbued with the life of the sulfur. Dead, frozen salt imbued with life. That's the great work.
From the dead stone. Yeah, that would play into the more modern perspective of we are the Philosopher's Stone. We are this alchemical lab in our bodies, right? And yeah, dude, blew my mind, bro.
100%. That's the great work, and that's what Odin did. Mm-hmm. So he took at Mimir's well, he took his third eye, his high oil mind, threw it down the well, liquid down the well, and that opened up his lowest salts or his ancestral memories. And now that everything's opened up, all of his chakras are opened up. He had to go to Yggdrasil and hang upside down and make the snakehead bite the tail. And so, because he had to reach down to grab the runes and pull them up to him, the snakehead had to bite the tail, and that's the alchemical marriage. And when he was done, he was an all-knowing, he was the big god, the head dude. He went from being a not head of the pantheon to he knows, because before this, he used to send out Yugen and Moonin all over the world, and they would bring back all the worldly knowledge, and he knew that was not enough. He needed the true memories of the world, of generations and generations of this plane, of everything that's happened here in order to truly understand. And that only comes through ancestral wisdom. So he had to open that up and then incorporate the two together. And now he is the all father.
Wow. That was beautiful, bro. I love that. It's making so much, again, back again to this idea of, again, I've been reading Philip K. Dick. So the logos that was frozen in time, essentially at Nag Hammadi, that was the living word. That was this thing that you're saying. That was that those were the missing pieces to the puzzle that the Gnostics knew about. And that's why they were wiped out, because it was about that time dilation. And, you know, Plato says we all have to remember. You know, we know everything already. We just need to remember. You know, there is no learning anything new because there's nothing new under the sun. You know what I'm saying? So you need to just remember. And I think alchemy is one of those technologies that and you said something really interesting earlier, where as you're observing your work, right? Because I know you have like a closed system, but these alchemists had glass vessels to be able to observe the work. And imagine just sitting there for hours and hours and hours, and it's like looking at clouds. Well, that cloud looks like Hello Kitty. Well, damn, that looks like a raven's head in there, you know? So the raven's head, and right, the toad is chained down to the bird, and it's like you start to daydream. You start to have vivid waking dreams in some sort of weird, and I could see where that would encapsulate a sort of philosophical aspect to this whole thing, because when you're working with your hands, your mind's gonna wander. You know what I'm saying? Back then they didn't have audio books or podcasts, so they're just weaving, bro. They're weaving real time as they're doing their thing. Wow. Amazing.
Exactly right. Like, honestly, when you're watching this happen, like even the basic distillation, it's so cool, because say this is half full, and you'll have this earth basically right here, the earth element, the solid, and then up here, a little cloud will first start forming at the very bottom, almost like fog. And that'll slightly get thicker, but then it won't like all turn into a cloud here. That cloud will start moving up. And this middle space, there'll be like a little tail that will at first be very thick, and it'll connect that cloud and this part. And then that tail will get thinner and thinner, and this cloud will move up and up. And then eventually 1 or 2 drops will go bloop, and they will make it out of the system. And then the rest of the system will crash. And so to me, this is like watching society, right? Like you started out with a very root society, very, very rooted. And then society starts getting more etheric, and it starts moving up, and that root, the connection to root starts disappearing. And then when that breaks at the same time, a couple little like chosen ones make it out of the system, but the rest just collapse, and it goes back down into the root society. And it's like you're just sitting there watching that over and over, some of the weird that happens when you're doing it. It's like super cool.
Well, if you think about it, right, Ben, we can start winding down on this. Essentially, how you're saying this transmutation of a reverse transmutation, really, of because we're not projecting anything in society to its highest form. If anything, we're breaking people down, and more censorship, more cancel culture type of stuff, right? Whatever happened to sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. That's out the window. Now we're going backwards. But society has always
words hurt most.
Yeah. The society now, alcohol is important in this, right? It extracts the spirit, right? It interacts with the salts, how you're saying. Alcohol is legal, baby. You can drink all the alcohol you want. You can break yourself down all you want. And then think about it. They're smoking the salts off of these legal plants now, right? The legal stuff. Okay, so you're watching the distillation of reality itself, right? There's hollow people walking around. There's distilled people walking around society. And I'm not saying that they're NPCs, but think on a more philosophical level of what we just talked about, this whole alchemical process and how it can be applied to a real life thing. Because, alcohol will quite literally destroy you. It'll calcify your liver or whatever it does to your, you know what I'm saying? Like it'll eat you from the inside out. And that's what they use in these distillation processes to extract the stuff that they want.
It's negative. It's just like if I was doing metal alchemy, it would be a mix of hydrochloric and sulfuric acid. Would you ever drink hydrochloric and sulfuric acid? No. Like, why would you drink the solvent from the plant level when you would never do it for other mineral or metal or anything? It makes zero sense to me. I don't drink alcohol at all.
Yeah, I don't drink
for ceremonies.
I don't drink a lot anymore, and now I'm even considering not even drinking at all after this conversation, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I drink mead at ceremonies, and once again, it's like Juan said, spirit. And so it's opening things up. And the thing about it is what do you lose when you drink? You lose your higher thought. Your body's just now all of a sudden doing things that your higher brain, your etheric and the oil side, which that alcohol strips out, and you piss all down the gutter. Mm-hmm. Like literally in the morning, why can't you take in the sun anymore? Because you've pissed all your oil out. You can drink a gallon of water and the sun's like, because you don't have the mercury to make that transfer anymore. That oil is gone and you've pissed it all down the gutter. And agreed. What really you see? Okay. So if you can pretend, have you ever looked into dark shamanism, bro?
Like necro yoga type of stuff, like the darker aspect, like the Typhonian magic type of stuff. No. So in order to make a chosen one or a prophet or whatever, that prophet always has to go through hell. The only way that can happen is, like if we
the alchemical process applied to the person is called the great work. And the first step of the alchemical process was appreciating this beautiful thing and then crushing it up and pouring alcohol over it and throwing it in the fire. You know, like none of that sounds fun applied to a
violent.
human. But that's what they right. So but that's what they do. They take these little kids, and it's dark shamanism. You can look this up. And they take these little kids and they horribly torture them. And the idea behind this is even if 1,000 little kids do nothing but get horribly tortured and die, or horribly tortured and be forever completely broken people, occasionally one is going to make its way through. That one drop at the end of the process, that one chosen drop that was just that perfect pure piece that was ready. That one, now we've got our profit. So they're making profits. Now apply that on a society level.
Okay.
What would you have to do?
We go back to the opening words, right? Strong, like again, it's this distillation of society where essentially they're conditioning to see who's the fittest, no? Like to see who will come out on the other side. Wow.
You want an Ubermensch? You've got to have a lot of to find that Ubermensch, you know?
Damn. Yeah, that like just unlocked like a whole thing in my brain of like, you know, Fritz Springmeier's work and like all that whole Moonchild stuff, like all that whole thing. It's like it's an initiation essentially, and then that's global. That's
exactly
on a mass scale. Wow, yeah, that's wild, bro. That's wild. Listen, Ben, I could talk to you for hours, bro. We gotta leave some on the table for this next time that we get together.
Yes.
We'll talk off air to see what equipment I need, and then we'll rendezvous again after I've done maybe a couple of distillations and see if I'm still here or not.
Well, and the beauty is going to be just real quick with essential oils. They're literally just taking the oil side and leaving that salt side out. So imagine a battery with a cathode and no anode. How's that pan out? That's why the stone has so much more efficacy than the oil, than the plant, than anything, because you've taken and you've made that perfect system. The people that are making essential oils alone are only taking and doing half the work. And that's why it doesn't make, that's why you can't, like dabs is the cannabis essential oil. You don't hear about that curing and lupus and doing all that. Rick Simpson oil, which is actually a very, very dirty extraction, still has the salt in it, and it does stuff. They've taken out the majority of the plant material, but not all of the plant material, like the way I'm going to teach Juan and like what we're talking about in our thing. So it's a much higher version of it. And because all that middle earth part's taken apart, you can make a more pure connection between that cathode and anode when you marry the masculine side back together. And so it works that much better, because next time we'll talk about resistance and how time and light and sound and everything else is only resistance. Watch Spiders on Saturday nights, guys. Love you.
Anything else you want to plug, Ben, before we get out of here?
You can try and I think my Flattoberfest video is probably coming out soon.
Awesome. All right, well, everybody, that was Odin's Alchemy. Check him out, YouTube, Ben Balderson. Make sure to follow the show, social media at the One-on-One Podcast, tjojp.com, 407-476-4606. Call in, tell us what you thought about this episode. If you like me, if you don't like me, whatever. All right, everybody. See you on the next one, and see you on the other side.